Allora, vi presento rapidamente Laila Yousef Sandoval, che è professoressa all'Università Complutense di Madrid, terrà la sua relazione in inglese e ci parlerà delle correnti del pensiero arabo contemporaneo. Sono molto felice di averla qui con noi e le lascio la parola.
Buongiorno, grazie mille a tutti e a tutte. È un piacere per me essere oggi alla Fondazione Corrente. Voglio ringraziare il professor Vittorio Morfino per il suo invito e la sua gentilezza. E sono davvero emozionata di essere qui, poiché il mio italiano non è molto buono. Farò la presentazione in inglese. Okay? Well, good morning again, and thank you for joining us. It is a very wide topic to deal with contemporary political Arab thought. So I have decided that the best way to focus the topic, to articulate the different questions on this issue, is to talk about the concept of state and nation regarding the Arab world, in case we can use this so general expression. But before we enter into details, I think it's very important to do an introduction on the main concepts of this topic, especially when we talk about so big populations in terms of numbers. Edward Said, an author I will talk about tomorrow, Palestinian author, mentions in his book Orientalism, his masterpiece Orientalism, that it is unbelievable to do so big statements about the Arab world or Arabs when we talk about 320 million people. This is the number of people considered as Arabs, not to mention the 1,600 million Muslims. Usually, it is a common mistake to identify Arab and Muslim as synonyms, and this is more important than it seems, especially when dealing with the nuances of each conflict or each circumstance of the different countries of the Arab or Muslim world. Arabs are mostly Muslims, but there are also Arab Christians and even a minority of Arab Jewish. On the other hand, Muslims are not always Arabs. We have Muslims from Iran, Indonesia, Turkey, and other different countries, not necessarily all of them Arabs, but it's true that a big quantity of them are Arabs and Muslims. I have mentioned that this is very important to avoid drawing some conflicts. Tomorrow I will talk about the question or the issue of Palestine as religious conflicts when they are not exactly, even if religion is a very important part, I don't consider it's a religious problem, rather a political one. So I consider it essential to make this first distinction between Arabs and Muslims. Once that we have accepted this, inside the Arab world, we find many different countries, many different areas and regions. And one question I would like to throw to the audience was precisely about this heterogeneity or homogeneity. I don't know exactly your vision on the issue, but I would say that the first distinction, or the second, once we have mentioned the distinction between Arab and Muslim, is the distinction between the Maghreb and the Mashreq. The Maghreb is the north of Africa, and that includes Morocco, Algeria, Libya, Tunis, and the Mashreq start with Egypt, and then includes Lebanon, Palestine, Jordan, Syria, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and other countries from the region. This difference, it's important because the more we approach to the Mashreq, to the east, to, let's say, to Saudi Arabia, or in general to Arabia, we find more common similarities between those countries I have mentioned at the end of the description. The Maghreb presents other characteristics. The Maghreb is confirmed by Arab countries as well. They share in part the same language, the Arab language, known as Fusha, the classic Arabic, but then each country has its different dialects. This is not only a curiosity, we will see that the language is a factor of union and also a factor of lack of union. And in terms of politics, that will have many translations I will explain later on. So just to summarize, the Maghreb and the Mashrek are both Arab areas, okay, with Muslim population, but also with Christian population. And I have to mention that some countries include some non-Arab populations. In the case of Morocco, the Amazighs, or in the case of Algeria, the Kabyle population, and other examples. For example, in Egypt, the Nubians may consider themselves as Egyptians, but not exactly as Arabs. So we are already observing these nuances and these internal differences among the different countries. So this is the map, the sociological map. If we go to the political situation, the contemporary situation, and we start from the 19th century, there are many factors to take into consideration. One of the most important ones is the decadence of the Ottoman Empire. Okay? The Ottoman Empire had created, according to some people who suffered a situation, a context of occupation, okay? But on the other hand, it generated stable structures, stability in the region, despite that character of occupation. Another important trait is, and I think this is very, very interesting, according to many authors, is the lack of, I would say, Leviathan structures. By this, I mean that in Europe, starting in the 17th century and after the religious wars in the Middle Ages, that created a very big amount of victims and wars in these conflicts among Catholics and Protestants. After this, and with the signature of the Peace of Westphalia in 1648, the consolidation of the state created very strong structures. Later on, that state will become the nation state. On the other hand, during the Ottoman Empire, even if the power was strong, they suffer from a lot of internal issues. And by this, I mean that even inside the same families, they kill each other. And that broke the linear structure of politics if we compare it with Europe. In Europe, the goal was to guarantee the consolidation, the continuation of these family lines, whereas during the Ottoman Empire, the internal conflicts made that more fragile political structures. And according to some authors, that was inherited by the countries that were conformed after that that end of the Ottoman Empire, and would be one of the reasons to explain that weak character of some, not all, of some states in the region. We have to mention as well the influence of the French Revolution to understand the desire of the regions under the Ottoman control to start the process of autonomy and independence. We can see here how, at the same time that the Ottoman Empire falls, the European hegemony consolidates itself. But you may know that this presents like a double face, the double face of Europe, that can be seen since the Middle Ages, or even during modern times. Modern times, I mean the philosophical modernity from the 17th to the 19th century. And by this, I mean that on one hand, Europe was able to develop the scientific revolution, many advances in terms of philosophy, the Enlightenment, all the rational philosophy, but at the same time, it created a double vision or a double face, as I said, in relation to the colonies. Okay? In the colonies, the international law didn't apply, the Jus Publicum Europeum didn't work. They had this vision that I consider is like the heritage of a Cartesian view on reality. We could even link the modern epistemology with modern politics. Modern epistemology starts when, especially Descartes, differentiates between the subject who knows and the objects that are known. Okay? In comparison to medieval and Aristotelian ways of knowing, we can see here that in the past, as I said, with Aristotle, the things of reality, the things of nature, had their own presences, ousia in Greek. They imposed their presence to the subjects. But since the 17th century, as the subject is the one who knows, the center of gravity is in himself or herself, and imposes the same way of knowing to all the objects. And it doesn't matter if these objects are things, territories, native populations. And that, as I said, represents the evolution of the scientific method, but at the same time, it talks us about a way of looking to reality in a very instrumental way, in a very dominating way. We could link it even to capitalism, right? The idea of manipulating and controlling, materially speaking, the things to get the maximum benefit and the maximum profit of them. This view, I insist, was moved to the colonies, so those territories were considered like blank pages, and the same with the populations who lived there. And that explains why all this violence that was avoided in Europe during this Westphalian phase was carried out in the colonies, where the law didn't work and where the schemes, the epistemological schemes, were very different. And we find that this double character of Europe rules along history. On the one hand, it represents, and it does, the defense, the support of human rights, of a different view of the world order, the defense of democracy, but at the same time, it has this other aspect of considering other regions of the world in a different way, and sometimes in contradiction with that support of human rights. I would like to come back to this idea of how the Ottoman Empire, when it falls, creates a very big in the Arab world, if you allow me to speak in this general way, because all the stable structures, all the security that it provided came to an end. The European powers divided and shared these lands among them. That provoked this emergence of national liberation fights, along with the influence of the Russian Revolution. So we are starting to see how different Western ideas, as the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, get mixed with the idiosyncrasy and the own characters of the Arab world. And that will be very important for the second part of the speech I will give today. That will be focused on a very specific theory, which is Baathism. But I will arrive there. Before, I have thrown this question of, is there heterogeneity among Arabs? We could apply the same question among Muslims, but I mentioned that I will focus on the Arab world, and especially on the Mashrek, because it's a very big topic, and it's better if I focus on a very specific issue. Another question that we could ask is if you consider that in these areas, is it more important the nation or the region? This is an open question. It is the feeling or the identity towards the country of each individual, or it's the region in general which makes people move. Probably, and I had this conversation yesterday with a person who is in the public. Probably people in the Arab world today would consider that the nation is the most important factor to determine their attachment to their ideas. But from the outside, we could see that the regional dynamics have much more influence, or as influence as the idea of the nation each individual has. But we could keep this question for the end, for the time of the debate. But this asymmetry, or this double game between the internal and the external inside the own region, not to mention the global issues, but inside the Middle East, the place I will focus, between nation and region, will be present even, as I mentioned, when we talk about Pan-Arabism and Baathism. But I will continue. We shouldn't forget as well the presence of Arabs in the diaspora in many other countries and continents in the world. For example, the Arab diaspora in Latin America, in Europe, and some minorities, Arab minorities, that could be present in Turkey, Iran, Azerbaijan, and Armenia. So the map is complex, but drawing it would avoid to make these general statements that are usually heard about, again, the Palestinian issue, or in general about the Arab world, because we are analyzing how complex it is. Okay. I will continue with the 19th century. In the 19th century, the Nahda took place. And the Nahda is a very important concept for the Arab contemporary thought. It will be like the Renaissance. That's the translation. It's a movement, an uprising of thinking, of theoretical energies, where we can observe that mix of external influence and original thought. We can find the growth of many publishing houses, university programs, education programs, books, magazines, reviews, and the reinforcement of the linguistic bond. Once again, the Arab language is winning more and more presence. Also, in this moment, at the end of the 19th century, we observe the appearance of the first political parties in this region, and an Arab consciousness inside the Ottoman Empire. I'm talking just before the fall of the Ottoman Empire. All this conjunction of circumstances made this Arab awareness grow, both from the part of Muslims, Arab Muslims, and Arab Christians. So at this beginning of the, I said at the end, at the beginning, sorry, of the 19th century, we find three different trends of thought: Pan-Islamism, Ottomanism, and a growing idea of nation. Then, with the First World War and with the end of Ottomanism, Arabism starts gaining more and more power. I'm following the scheme of a very famous Arab thinker, well, not Arab, Spanish, but specialist on Arab thinking, Carmen Ruiz Bravo, in case you're interested. And she divides these different periods. The third one would be until 1930, when nationalism and socialism appears as trends of thought. Between 1930 and 1945, nationalism and socialism continues with this emergence, and until 1952, Pan-Arabism appears as an actor in this game of different theories. I haven't analyzed each of them because I guess you are all familiar that Pan-Islamism considers that this Islam, the Muslim religion, would be the factor of union Among Arabs, Ottomanism is the defense of the Ottoman Empire. Nationalism, we will see how, when applied to Arab countries, it gets very specific characteristics, along with socialism. And Pan-Arabism is this idea that all Arab countries should be united, not in terms or not taking religion as this factor of union, but taking their Arab character, as Arab nations that they are. In fact, the goal of Pan-Arabism is the reconstruction of the Arab unity, once the European powers have divided with the Sykes-Picot Agreement the region in different areas. Pan-Arabism uses Arabism, and here we have a very small nuance. Arabism expresses the ingredient of the unity. Okay? Pan-Arabism would be the political idea or the political theory to make all Arabs united, and Arabism will be the reason why, so to speak. But inside this reason to be together, we find the main goal, the finality, the cause, what is called in Arab Qadiyat al-Uruba, the cause of Arabism, and the cause of Arabism is Palestine. Okay. We are talking about the 1950s. 1948 had already took place, the creation of the State of Israel with the partition that didn't take place completely, as the Palestinian state was not created, right? So Palestine became the cause of this Pan-Arabist movement. Along with this Pan-Arabism, at the same time, there is some kind of tension with other type of political movements, which are the different nationalisms that took place inside each Arab country, or inside the countries that are countries, because not all of them are yet. I'm talking about Lebanon, Egypt, and Syria, especially. In Lebanon, we have a very particular case that could occupy an entire seminar as well. Lebanon is conformed by Arabs, both Muslim and Christian Arabs, that some tendencies have highlighted the non-Arab component of the Lebanese history. It's called Phoenicianism, how Phoenicians were a very important part of Lebanese history, and some people, even today, are more attached to that Phoenician past rather to their Arab present, let's say. This has been carried out especially by some, not all, but by some Christian political parties. I don't know exactly in English how to say Katayev, phalangist, would say. I don't know if that's the term in English. The Lebanese phalangist, who consider themselves as non-Arabs, or who want to be like non-very linked to that idea of Arabity or Arabism, and prefer to recuperate, to take that element of Phoenicia back, right? And that has created many internal divisions inside the Lebanese society, and this Lebanese nationalism. Then we have Egypt. Egypt represents with Nasser the Pan-Arabist ideal of union among Arabs. And then we have Syria and Iraq, but I will keep that for the second part. As I've said that I will focus on Baathism. Which are the goals of nationalism? Okay. We have Pan-Arabism and we have nationalism. The goals of nationalism are, in the first place, the survival under oppression, under the oppression of colonialism. In the second place, they want to find a place in the new global order. All the geopolitical map is suffering a reconfiguration, and they want to fit somehow. There is an anthropological goal as well, which is to create new human beings in the long term, to find individual freedom, to achieve this specificity of the Arab. Well, this would be in the case of Pan-Arabism. In the case of nationalism, this Lebanese, Egyptian, Syrian individual able to gather in himself or herself traditional the traditional heritage, and at the same time be part of a complex present with some even neoliberal, not yet because we have not arrived in the 70s, but a new order where things can't be as they were before. So the dilemma between tradition and renovation is a constant in these trends of thought. Also, the idea of the vitality of the nation as something natural and alive, and that is made through the life of these individuals. And again, we can see here the importance of the Arabic language, and the difference between Pan-Arabism and the different nationalisms is very clear here. The Arabic language would be like the threat, according to Pan-Arabist visions, to unite all Arabs. On the other hand, nationalisms will take the dialects of each country and each region. Give me a second. This is complex because the difference between classic Arabic, Fusha, and the different dialects, Amiye, are very, very wide. Maybe you are thinking about formal language in English or in Spanish or Italian, and then how we speak in our daily lives. But I'm not talking about that difference. The difference is profound. The Fusha is the classic language which is studied at school, the language which is used in public speeches, political speeches, media, and then the dialects are very, very different in terms of vocabulary, in terms of grammar. Usually they are oral languages, but they also have, even today, the way to be written with numbers, with different codes that change when we take different countries. And sometimes the understanding between different dialects is not possible. Okay? The more we approach, for instance, to the Middle East, the more the dialect is close to the classic Arabic. If we move, the dialect changes much more. So the different national movements will take the dialects as factor of personality of the nation, instead of focusing on that common Arabic that all Arabs speak. Well, we may ask, and we can find this in the literature, if this nationalist movement includes some racist component, because I'm talking all the time about Arab populations and the Arabic. But according to the authors I have used, the literature I have read, there is no such a racist component. It is not a praise of the Arab populations as superior in comparison to others. That in a situation of colonialism, in a situation of the imposition of this view of the Western look, the Western science, the Western epistemology, which is based on this asymmetry of those who have the power and those who are oppressed, there was that need to reinforce that character, right? To put it at the same level as other people. Also, religion, it's a factor to be mentioned. In this moment, I'm talking since the beginning of the 19th century until the 1950s, religion is not a very influential factor. It is important. It creates conglomerates of social groups. It is experienced individually as a very important part of people's life, but politically speaking, it's not yet a factor which could determine. But this is not due to some kind of strong secularism, okay? But because religion was a factor of lack of unity. And we are in a moment where, at least from the part of Pan-Arabism, the idea is to emphasize these factors of unity. In the case of nationalisms, which are more tendent to insist on the difference, we don't find neither this insistence on religion. It's a pragmatic attitude, because we have to take into consideration that inside each country, we find also this plurality of religion. So not for Pan-Arabism and not for nationalism was a useful plan to insist on the religious difference. That will change in the 1970s. Another important factor is the land. Okay? The land from very different aspects. The land from a political point of view, because what they want is that homeland to be called a state and to have control of their states, because having a state under occupation doesn't fulfill all the requirements. And also a more, I don't want to say metaphysical, but a more existential attachment to the land, to the earth, especially if we look at how these people who are usually from agricultural origin or who are linked to agricultural works are observing how these European powers are taking their lands with all the use of industrialization, machines, scientific advance, but who don't present this link, this love towards the earth they are taking. Again, I come back to that idea of the Cartesian epistemology. It's not that it's his fault, but that heritage of considering things and reality as mere objects, depriving them of all of any metaphysical attribute, of any mystic aspect, right? I don't want you to have this idea of native people as being obsessed with rituals or mythical or mystical relationships with the earth. It's more simple than that. It's an existential relationship because they have worked the land, they have lived in the land, they live among the trees and the lands who belong to their grandparents, and the arrival of people who may be more advanced only in terms of technology and that get and acquire these lands without any special law, because it's the same to take this land or this other land, because the objects as objects are all homogeneous from this perspective of the capitalist profit, contrast with this personal attachment that people have towards the place where they were born. So the land will be a very important factor. The economy should be mentioned as well. In these decades, we can see a moment of unemployment, difficult situation from the point of view of the economy, and the alliance of high classes, of native high classes, with the foreign powers. It is important to see how the capitalist dynamic goes through the social structures. So people who have a very good position inside each country or city or region establish this agreement with European powers, and that started a problem. We will see tomorrow how the first colons, Israeli colons in Palestine, wanted to change the Ottoman law. They wanted to get to appropriate the houses and the land in opposition to an Ottoman law, which established that that was not possible. And it is through property and through economy. It is one of the vectors also of the colonialist structure. Not to talk about the natural resources that all the region has in terms of oil, gas, and many other different resources. Even in the case of Gaza, we see usually we do the analysis from a very political perspective, and sometimes we forget the economic aspect and how rich this area is in front of the Mediterranean, with all the resources under the sea, in the land, in a place where water scarcity is a problem, etc., etc. So I would insist on that, not only on the occupation itself, on colonization itself, but also in this part that any colonization includes. And finally, a very important factor of how nationalisms conceive themselves is history. Theoretically speaking, history is where the life of the nation reveals itself, especially Arab history. It's a strategy of recovering this process of memory, of giving a value that had been erased by the Orientalist views, by the colonizers' views, as something or as traditions with less value in comparison to the industrialized and scientific way of living of colonizers. But these national movements reinforce the idea that history reveals that Arabs had a moment of glory, a moment of splendorous politics, etc. Then, in the 70s, we see a turn back to religion, and that will change many aspects on politics. First, the Iranian Revolution is one of the most important chapters in the history of the Middle East. Iran is not an Arab country, has a small minority, but it's not an Arab country. And this revolution that that at first it attracted the attention of Michel Foucault because he saw it as a moment of popular uprising against an oligarchy who controlled the economy in alliance with the United States. And that revolution, even if popular, at the end was translated into a conservative wave that affected the entire region, and that even affected traditional or common ways of dressing. In the past, in these decades I have just mentioned, women wore the traditional dresses of their cities. That's also very important, even if it doesn't seem so. But to talk about the different cities, for example, of Palestine or other countries, the way they are woven, the motifs of the dresses represents the plants, the trees of each city, the fruits, the nature of Jerusalem or Bethlehem or Jaffa or different cities. But the Iranian Revolution kind of homogenized the dressing code into black instead of colors, and that grew in general in the Middle East. Another important factor to explain why this turn back to religion took place was the fall of nationalism. Nationalism and pan-Arabism didn't succeed, and especially didn't succeed when dealing with the Israeli occupation of Palestine. There were some hopes that they could achieve that victory, that the feeling of defeat invaded the entire region. Socialism or nationalism couldn't solve the problem, couldn't bring any advantage, and that created a disappointment, a feeling of disappointment towards these theoretical or political movements. Another important factor is the beginning of conservative neoliberalism, if we can put that label. The rentist economy as well in 1973 with the oil crisis, the power, and I think that's essential to mention, the power in the Middle East moved from urban centers, especially in Egypt, in Iraq, in Syria, to Bedouin states, to Bedouin societies, which present different characteristics. When we talk about urban centers in Iraq, Syria, Egypt, we talk about more liberal, if you want to say, more liberal societies, Levantine societies, and Bedouin ones are different, are more anchored to tradition, to religion, to different dynamics in comparison to the cities in the Middle East. Well, after the 70s, we move on. We arrive to our current days, and that will be the focus of my presentation tomorrow. I will deal with the issue of Palestine. But as I have mentioned, the importance or the rise and fall, the fast rise and fall of socialism and Marxism, I would like to give some names on Marxist today. The most important one is Samir Amin. Samir Amin was a critic of Nasser, for example, and that's why I'm mentioning him, because he said that Samir Amin, that Nasserism didn't mean a real change. It was important to update the Arab thought, to see how interesting it is to mix these traditions, which are absolutely European, as Marxism, as socialism, with the specific characteristics of the Arab world. And it's not that he's contrary to these ideas, the opposite. He's in favor, but precisely because he's a Marxist, he considers that the real policies didn't follow that line of thought. I would like to mention as well, I would focus now on a very important theory, which is Baathism. Okay? And I will dedicate this second part of the seminar to go into the detail of this theory. The reason why I'm going to focus on Baathism is that, to my mind, it represents all the traits I have mentioned in this general overview on the topic, and it represents the possible novelties, advantages, hopes, desires that the national pan-Arabist movement brought to contemporary Arab thought, and at the same time, its precarious structure, its failures, and some problems that I think can be extrapolated in general to this conjunction of socialism in the Arab world. So, Baathism, Baath, means also Renaissance. Okay? To keep to put in movement all the novel forces of human beings to make a change. And it is in the 1940s when it appeared as a movement of change. There is a very famous sentence that later on was expressed by Abdel Mohsen Al-Qasimi, which says all Arab people should have the same value the day that they weight and measure each other. If we unite their souls, we shouldn't be worried if the bodies are still dispersed. That is, Arabs present the same soul, according to this author, but the bodies are plural and different. Once again, this topic of unity, plurality, that it's a characteristic of Arab thought. What does Baathism express? First, the union of three ideas I've explained at the beginning: nationalism, Arabism, and socialism. Okay? we have two different types of Ba'athist movements in Iraq and in Syria. In Iraq, it started politically as a government in 1963, in Syria in 1968. Later on, I will talk about the families which carried out this political movement. The union, I've said, of nationalism in Syria and Iraq, and the difference is to be mentioned because they were confronted. They didn't achieve an agreement. The Ba'ath in Iraq and the Ba'ath in Syria. So from the very beginning, we see this lack of union inside a very, let's say, small party. Arabism, because they articulated their cause on Arabism, and socialism, and we will see in which very specific way they created this Arab socialism. That is the name the movement received as well, Arab socialism. Many people would be surprised that something like that could be a theory or could exist, but it was somehow a very important movement inside the Arab thought. It expresses as well the link between tradition and modernity, because it includes this, for the Arabs, new ways of analyzing reality, but without renouncing to what makes them Arabs, the Arab tradition, the idea of nation, and the different authors I could mention here in case you want to do some research later on are four: Saki al-Arsusi, Sati al-Husri, Salaheddin al-Bitar, and especially Michel Aflaq. Michel Aflaq is one of the most important Ba'athist thinkers, and well, with the curiosity that he was a Christian thinker that insisted on the importance of recuperating the Arab component, linked as well with the Muslim tradition, along with the Christian tradition. The reasons of the defeat of Baathism, apart from the internal dynamics of each country of Syria and Iraq, were moved by the end of the Soviet Union. In fact, the Soviet Union didn't pay much attention to these Ba'athist movements, even if they were very related to the Soviet movement, but the position of the Soviet Union with the Middle East is very ambiguous, right? And then, as I mentioned before, with the Iranian Revolution, with the fall of the Berlin Wall, that created all the field for the defeat of Baathism. Today, Baathism doesn't exist, not even in Syria, with the end of the Russian support to the al-Assad family. But even in the time, in the last years or decades, when al-Assad was in power, we cannot say that Baathism was the real way of doing politics. In the case of Iraq, the family al-Tikriti, the family of Saddam Hussein, were the ones to hold that Ba'athist movement. At the end of his life, when Saddam Hussein was more aware of the threat of the invasion of the United States, he approached more to more conservative religious positions. But for some decades, he supported that movement. But I wouldn't like to link Baathism to the politicians who actually didn't carry out the ideas that were in the movement. I would like to focus on what the original authors and fathers of this movement did with Baathism. Well, according to them, according especially to Michel Aflaq, the author I've mentioned, and also Bitar, an Ahda is needed. An Ahda, the Renaissance that took place in the 19th century, was needed again in this period of the 40s, 50s, 70s. And this should have the main goal of overcoming the lack of union among Arabs. Okay, that was their goal. They asked in different texts how is this possible? How can we find this common aspect of all Arabs if what we find is that diversity I've been explaining? They also want to create a more emancipatory view of men, so we can see very similar characteristics with the Pan-Arabist and the nationalist movements I have mentioned before. And the goal of the Ba'athist movement is an uprising of these Arab nations as transformation, a national revolution, we would say today. And that involves, again, not only a political change of model or of policies, but a transformation of human beings that should ask themselves how to be better individuals. Sorry. Taking into account that plurality and the lack of union that diversity presented, and I want to clarify this because it's not that they were against the plurality of the societies they live in, that they looked at that plurality as a factor of disgregation, of lack of union. It was not plurality in itself. That's why I mentioned that we are not talking about racist theories at all, but being the goal, the unity of all Arabs, as the lack of unity was and is part of the problems they face as people who are, some of them, occupied. They want to go to the roots, to the reasons of that lack of a common front. And they found that it was that diversity. What can make them be together? Well, in the first place, the awareness of the fact that they are victims of colonization. That should be present in the thoughts of Arabs, according to the authors of this theory. A second factor that could work as a factor of union is the belonging of or belonging to the same culture, the Arab culture. We have said that history and tradition is a very important part of these movements. In the third place, the use of the Arabic language, of the Arab language, and not only as a tool to communicate and to understand each other, but also as the vehicle of the Islamic revelation. It was the language that was used to reveal, and also the vitality that language provides, a vitality that is present since the birth of the community, an original bond that should be translated into a political association. Okay? So we can see many threads together: the language bond, the existential link, the awareness of being victims, but at the same time, the awareness of being able to do something else apart from being victims, but to create something together. So some authors talk, I'm thinking about Carré, that has analyzed this issue, along with George Korn. If you are interested in bibliography, I can give you more. Carré talks about linguistic pan-Arabism. how language becomes a political tool, a political element beyond the union itself of Arabs. It is paradoxical that, for example, in the European Union, we don't share the same language at all, but still Europeans were able to create this transnational structure, to my mind, according to a very specific economic goal led by France and Germany, but still that movement was made. And Arab populations, despite the fact of sharing the same culture with its differences, but the same culture, the same language, also with its differences, but still the same language, mostly the same religion, with many differences as well, but being part of the same community doesn't find the way to be a unique actor, and instead to be fractured and broken into many different groups. Decolonization explains in part this situation of lack of unity, but still these authors see how this is presented as a problem. But more than the language itself, what the Ba'athist theorists consider could be the final bond to overcome the different cleavages of the region is the Palestinian cause. So I hope that you are seeing how the general characteristics I mentioned at the beginning are landing on this specific theory. Many of them are present in the pan-Arabism of Nasser, but we'll see that the specificity of Baathism is a particular way they have to adapt socialism. Not Marxism, but socialism, but I will arrive there. So the Palestinian cause, after the creation of the State of Israel in 1948, and the illegal occupation later on of the West Bank, Gaza, East Jerusalem in 1976, and the failure to achieve a Palestinian state according to the resolutions of the Assembly of the United Nations, made that Palestine, I insist, more than the Arab language or this linguistic pan-Arabism itself, became the real factor of union. Michel Aflaq said the Palestinian cause doesn't have a particular solution, but is the essence of the Arabic homeland, right? If this Palestinian state becomes real, if it's recognized, it would have, according to Aflaq, it would have the power, the ideological power to transform itself into the cause of movement, like to put in motion all the forces, the energies, the dynamics of the Arab people. Okay. One of the risks of insisting on this idea of unity, I guess you have already seen this problem, is that differences and heterogeneity tend to be suppressed or tend to be eliminated in the name of a high unity, and that can be observed in the definition of nation that Al-Husri, one of these authors, expresses. He says, all individuals have the same way of understanding nation and don't change. Well, I'm doing this quick translation, sorry. And don't change when they think about the duties, the fundamental duties towards this common and shared homeland. This idea of every individual having the same idea of nation when talking about not only about one country, that it would be already a fiction and an illusion. If we apply this to the set of hundreds of Arabs, it's not only non-realistic, but it misses the idea itself of what a society is. A society is based on difference, and that's precisely what politics are about, but dealing and solving differences without suppressing them, right? But the Baathism had this idea of, in the name of the cause of Arabism, or in the name of the cause of Palestine, all individuals would overcome all the differences they have. And in fact, we may think, and we can ask ourselves, if it works even today. Actually, I would say all or most of Arab individuals would think, maybe I'm wrong, I don't want to talk in the name of the 120 million people, I only talk in my name, but it's that it's a shared feeling, this idea of the need of justice in Palestine, of a Palestinian state. I think that could work more as a factor of union, more than Arabism or Pan-Arabism, precisely due to these small differences inside each country, inside each society, and in a moment when we know that these ideas don't work even in Western countries. Socialism or communism are not a factor of amalgam, not even in our societies. So it's understandable that it doesn't work there as well. I said before that they insisted, the Baathist authors insisted on the personal growth and transformation of the subject. And the goal is their own happiness. In this part, they become more philosophical or more anthropological. That's why I said it's kind of contradictory to build a personal happiness on a unique idea of individual or of human being. But once they said that happiness is the goal, they subsume this idea to the idea of nation. Okay? The Constitution of Iraq of 1947 establishes in Article 15 that the Pan-Arab national bond is the only bond that exists in the Arab state. So first, the union of, or the idea of the nation, and that is precisely the way individuals have to achieve happiness. Okay, but happiness is not above the national cause. I would say that this happens also in any political movement, even in Western traditions, where politics become the reason to act, that personal happiness or personal interest gets in a second level, precisely because individual interests usually are against that common or that community goal, which is the nation. I would go into this relationship Baathism has with socialism, because it's very, very complex. This constitution, I've mentioned the Constitution of Iraq of 1947. I'm focusing on Iraq because it's, for me, it's a very interesting country where we can be witness of these big changes from socialism to a conservative traditions, even to the Islamic State, the end of the Islamic State, and how in a very short lapse of time, the question is, how is it possible that a country who embraced socialism can turn into a radical conservative control, because it was this group which took control, even if it ended? How is it possible? And what is the relationship? Why some members of that Islamic State were in the past in the highest positions of the Ba'ath Party? How can a person become or transform himself from a socialist to a supporter of the Islamic State? It's strange, or it deserves some reflection. But I will come back to 1947. The Constitution in Article 26 says the Ba'ath is a socialist and believes that the wealth of the economic wealth of the nation is property of the nation. Okay? So Baathism agreed and incorporated socialism, the socialist theory, in a very sui generis way. They took the theses that were more convenient to their own interest. Okay? They adapted themselves, and this can be analyzed into two different ways. On the one hand, it's interesting to see how ideas get mixed with other factors. The idea of nation, the idea of state, the idea of socialism. But at the same time, on the other hand, it shows us that precisely due to the field where it grows, it cannot be the same as we understand by socialism in our Western countries. Okay? Another debate will be if socialism itself can be free of any interference once it comes to Earth, or once it's applied. But in the case of Arab socialism, is very, very particular. So they use socialism to support idea of the right of people to their own national sovereignty, and rejecting in part the link or the influence of Marxism, of communism. At the beginning, Aflaq and Bitar, the two authors I'm mentioning, were attracted by the communist ideas because they studied in Paris, in the Sorbonne. And that explains why they brought these ideas to their countries. But at the end, at the very beginning, they rejected it for some reasons. In the first place, because they related the European origin of Bolshevism with colonialism. Are we going to implant or to transmit this theory or these ideas that belong to the tradition of the colonial powers? And because they rejected this insistence of communism on the working class fight. Okay? Not because they were against that, because they thought that they were too imperialist for Arab societies, okay, to focus on materialistic aspects, and because this attention to social classes, to the struggle of proletarians, etc., move the focus of what was important, that was the liberation and the autonomy of our people. So we can see here that when we get out of context, the context of appearance of socialism, and they want to adapt it to the particular circumstances of the Arab world, there are some frictions, right? In general, or in summary, we can say that the Marxist view was not written thinking on the circumstances of the Arab world, and that's why they rejected it. We can observe from the beginning that the Ba'athist movement was very linked to tradition. Okay? It's not a radical change on how the Arab world was. On the contrary, they wanted to use, or they wanted to maintain and to keep that tradition, but to transform it into an emancipatory movement, both politically and personally speaking. And that's why, according to them, breaking that link with the past wouldn't make sense. On the contrary, and coming back to the issue of history, they wanted to make a praise, a very positive and optimistic praise of the Arab past and culture, because that could be used as a way to unite Arabs. Some people even hesitate about whether label this movement as socialist or not. It wasn't Marxist, but still they consider themselves socialists. But some people say that that is not deserved. How can we believe that there is a link with socialism? Because they express it, basically. They express a flag. Michel Flag insisted that the base should be nationalist, populist, socialist, and revolutionary. Dawisha, an author who has studied that, affirms this. So they considered that the best option was to support a non-Marxist socialist, to keep that idea of the working class and the role of the state in relation to the working class. They didn't reject at all that idea. They supported that idea, that in as much that goal could work with the main ideals that I mentioned of Arabism. In fact, the constitution I've been reading of 1947, the Ba'athist Constitution of Iraq, establishes in Article 32 that the working class, that the workers, I'm reading, will participate in the administration of the factories, and they will be given, apart from their salary, the benefits that the state will determine. So I think that here we can observe how it was really applied, at least in the Constitution, that socialist, at least, idea, and how the goal was to create a different economy. Okay, a different economy. However, this goal of changing not only the economy, but in general, the idea to make Arabs be aware of their situation, be free, be more conscious of who and where they are, didn't satisfy at all the interest or the desires of, for example, of the American administration. Okay, and that's why, in part, how Iraq has been one of its main goals of attacks. There are some statements of documents that the CIA has shown to the public. It's very curious, and according to the CIA, so with many quotation marks, they consider that that there was a growing fear in Iraq that the nationalization of the means of production would end or would attack the business class, but that actually it didn't happen. It was written in the Constitution, but that at the end, the Iraqi government tried to calm the business class, even if, it says the CIA, the Ba'athist theory considers these business people as natural enemies of revolution. So in theory, they had these speeches, but it seems, according to the CIA, I insist, that it didn't it wasn't translated into real changes. I don't know if we should analyze more in depth if they were real changes. There is an evolution, obviously, in the history of Iraq with many flaws and many totalitarian situations, but there was a moment where at least there was an apparent change of starting with women going to university. It's true that that happened also in countries which were not Baathist countries, that before the Iranian Revolution, and I would say that after the Iranian Revolution, the presence of women in university, it's very common, but it's part of this Orientalist view that Edward Said denounced, to have this dark and a negative image. Women could drive from the very beginning in our countries, with some exceptions we all know, but they could go to university, they could study, they could work. And it is true that at least at the beginning, the Baath party in Iraq insisted on that presence of women in industries, in universities, in education. If it was propaganda or not, if later on in rural areas, of course, that was not the reality. It's something to analyze from an empirical point of view, but at least in theory, it was included in part that advance in comparison to, well, to other countries and with other times, right? Let me see if another concept that we could link to this analysis is the concept of democracy. And democracy is a term that sometimes wants to be, again, like transported or implanted in societies that have experienced a different path from, in comparison to European history. And we could say that the same happens in relation to socialism. The same happens with the idea of democracy. These authors, these Baathist authors, understand democracy as a source of legitimacy that comes from the people, from the union of the people, like a populist view, a community that has to fight to get their aspirations, the will of the masses, and linked and based on this idea of Renaissance, of Nahda, of being an important character of the global scene, but at the same time, a mere copy of Western models, simply to replicate the same idea without any root, would be a failure. It's not enough to take the concept and try to apply it. This enters in confrontation with some philosophical trends, or with philosophy itself. We could ask ourselves if, as human beings, do we share the same desire or aspiration to some universal ideas, including democracy, freedom? We may have, but according to these authors, the way to achieve or to develop these ideas of democracy and freedom need to be like connected, like almost physically connected with the life of people who are going to make the ideas real. And the people live in contexts, in specific societies, with a history, with a tradition, and that's why, according to them, this idea of pure rationality or cold rationality that in theory is part of the European tradition, way of thinking, in the case of the Arab populations, can't be exactly like that, because the Arab individuals are also linked to a more spontaneous experience and life, and not that scientific and cold look on things. We could also discuss if that is real in the case of Europeans, if we were like cold entities without bodies and only minds thinking. But Aflac had very clear that it wasn't enough to simply take concepts, but to make them real through the materiality of the context. In relation to the role of religion, we find another note in the case of the Ba'athist theory. Michel Aflaq said that Arabism and Islam are not antagonists, and they can't be because they belong to the same nature. I've said that Michel Aflaq was a Christian thinker, that he recognizes a very important role of Islam in the confirmation of the Arab character. However, in the Ba'athist program, secularism has a very important role. Okay? We have to distinguish the fact that Michel Aflaq recognized the importance of Islam didn't mean that Baathism was a religious theory. On the contrary, laicism was part of the program, but without renouncing to religion. Okay? It's not expelled, it's not rejected from the political imaginary. It's part of that exercise of integrating elements of tradition, of being like honest to what Arabs feel themselves. We cannot reject or refuse the idea that religion is a very important part of Arab life, including for Christian Arabs. Christianity is very important for them, the same for Muslims. And I think that in part this is an honest exercise that Baathism makes, instead of simply, as I've been explaining, simply copying, pasting ideas, trying to adapt them to the reality of Arab mentality or mindset. So according to Aflaq, the Arab nationalism cannot avoid this Muslim experience. He says, our nationalism is a living being of complementary members. So the different parts of the experience of the political individuals includes that acknowledgement of religion. He also admits, or he also remembers, Michel Aflaq, how Islam was revealed through Arabic language, and again that importance of the linguistic aspect. An author I mentioned before, Carré, throws a very interesting question at this regard. He says, if European secularism is full of the Christian heritage, how is it going to be different if in the case of Arab societies, right? And I think this is interesting because as I just explained, we describe Western thinking as being cold or scientific or isolated from many circumstances, but many ideas, structures that we have today have a very important Christian root. The notion of representation itself, the division of powers, and many other terms and vocabulary and thoughts we use to describe our politics is influenced by centuries of history characterized by Christianism. So here the debate, moving back to the Ba'athist situation, the debate here is how to integrate religion into this socialist movement, Arabic socialist movement, as a cultural or historical component rather than a religious one. And here I think there is a lot at stake, right? According to Guider, for example, who has also studied the theory of Aflaq, Aflaq only kept the linguistic and the cultural heritage. But still, the religion should be kept aside. Okay? He recognizes the importance of religion, but in terms of politics, it's not the instance which decides. And according to Guider, this contemporary author who studies baptism, this is important, but because the policies and the different laws that were approved in this period had that secular trait, okay, that was translated into real politic, even if, as I've said, then it failed. How that became possible, according to him, making that the different religious groups in Iraq live together, Christian and Muslim, or even in Syria as well, because the center of union would be the fact that they are Arabs instead that they are from their different religions. Or, for example, he mentioned, well, it is mentioned here, how the minorities, the Christian minorities, were protected by the Iraqi constitution of 1970s. So I would say that the Ba'athist movement had many theoretical problems. Okay, it didn't achieve to consolidate itself or to have a clear idea on how to make that mix possible. And of course, obviously, in terms of practice, the ways Hussein exercised his totalitarian power with violence, and that change that he experienced, and also the laws experienced from 1991, and that approach to more conservative and religious positions made that at the end, it happened the same as with Syria. It was only the name of Ba'ath which was there, but actually there were not any more, not even a draft of Ba'athist politics. One of the reasons that explain how so in the case of Iraq, how the society ended up being controlled by the Islamic State, and that some members of the Islamic State were previous Ba'athist, are based, according to me, on the idea of power, right? And by this, I mean that the Islamic State inherited all this structure, the bureaucratic situation, and that explained that many people were so surprised that from one day to another they created I don't know if we can call it a state, because to be a state you have to be recognized, that some kind of political strong structure. And that was because Iraq was a very bureaucratic state, very organized control, and the United States put together in the invasion of Iraq, in the same camp, members of these Islamist movements who had been have gone to Iraq to fight against the second invasion, and members of the Ba'athist government, because one of the strategies that explains the situation, the dramatic situation of Iraq even today, is that the United States destroyed the structures of the state, the army, the bureaucratic, the public workers, that was eliminated. Okay, and some of these bureaucrats were moved to a camp called Buka camp, which is also very shocking. Buka was the name of one firefighter of the 11th September. I don't remember if he died or if he was hurt. I guess he died. I'm not 100% sure. And we may ask why or what is the relationship between the 11th September and Iraq? There is no relationship at all. Saddam Hussein didn't participate, Iraq didn't participate at all in the 11th September, but, and I come back to the beginning, this idea that all Arabs are the same, they act in the same way. It doesn't matter if they are here or there. Created for the public imaginary, especially in the United States, that idea that Iraq probably is part of that, even if it wasn't, right? Despite this absence of link between Iraq and 11th September, during the invasion of Iraq, they, in 2003, if I remember well, they created this camp. And in that camp were these bureaucrats of the state of Iraq and members of Islamist groups who had were there to fight. So with this sharing time, they spend together years in confinement, in jail there. They found a way to understand each other, and they got like contaminated somehow by very radical ideas. And the fact that this Ba'athist movement wasn't really completely secular, okay, I think that made this radicalization easier. Okay, I'm saying that Baathism was radical at all, because I've explained that it was a secular movement, but it was not anti-religion, or it was not 100% secular. So when the situation became so hard, as with the invasion of Iraq, it simply happened. That's why I also added the factor of power. The former Ba'athist governors wanted to take power back. So for them, it wasn't important if it was in the name of the Islamic State, in the name of Baathism, in the name of religion, or any other factor. Okay, so it was like, I don't want to say like a natural transition, but especially taking into consideration that the last decades of Baathism were not Baathism at all. And with that context of American occupation and the destruction of the state of Iraq, and how they live together, this radical Islamists don't represent the essence of Islam, of course, in their radicalism. Altogether, made it easier that the way the Ba'athist, some Ba'athist governors had to come back to power was through that change of mindset. In fact, the foreign fighters or the foreign terrorists who went to Iraq and Syria with Islamic State were in the first line. I mean, they were used to do the real battle, but the ones who controlled the situation and who were in power were the national groups from Iraq and Syria. Obviously, they were not going to give that power to people who came from Europe itself. So I think it's interesting to observe how this changed. Also, how this Islamic State was able to coin their money, to expand, to create their passports, to imitate that form of the state, because I insist, it was already there, but it only changed the hands. But at the end, it lasted a few time. I think that some people expected that terrible situation would last more. But once the different foreign powers intervened and really intervened, it ended. Nowadays, the situation in Iraq is still very complex. The suffering of decades of war and the destruction. I insist a lot on this, the building of a state, which is this bureaucratic apparatus, a strong army, or a consolidated institutions, doesn't exist nowadays, even if nor the Islamic State nor Baathism exists anymore. But I think it's a place where with all of history, since the origin of history is there, but where politics also acquire different shapes. So to end with a conclusion on this theoretical movement, I'd say that it included many contradictions. Maybe it suffered from a lack of theoretical corpus. I don't know if it's a Western look that we are very used to study very schematic theories. I don't know, Kant or Marx, and Baptism doesn't offer that type of theory. It's a mix. It includes many explanations, but it's not a system. It's not a philosophical system, right? And the fact that during decades, totalitarian governments were the ones to implement these theories. I think that's one of the most important parts. On the other hand, they were able to articulate religious plurality, to overcome that confessional tension, especially in Iraq, where we find many different religions or beliefs inside the same religion. And they were able to express some spirit of law in terms of socioeconomic equality. And that's something that we should remember, despite this anti-democratic character this theory had. So it was, I think, an ideology betrayed by its own practices, okay? But also because it was a practice without strong theory. So it has these two flaws. Maybe if they had reflected more on socialism itself, Marxism itself, it could have been stronger or not. But what is true is that nowadays this is a theory that doesn't work anymore. It's not functional. It doesn't exist. It's like a memory of the past. And I don't think it could be recovered because it doesn't create the energy of cohesion for a people. It's not useful. In the case of Syria, the situation is very complex as well. It lacks from legitimacy, again, because the actors who put that into practice, these two families, Al-Tikriti and Al-Assad, were not able to win that legitimacy for the people. And the question is, which theory is able to bring this feeling of unity to Arab societies? If a new way or a new form of creating that bond can be real, can be worked today. I'm not very optimistic at this regard. Probably the cause we mentioned at the beginning, the Palestinian cause. Tomorrow I will mention that, but it has worked as a tool to mobilize not only the way Arabs think, but also the global public opinion in general is united by that feeling. But it seems that something else is needed to create a political unity, not only among Arabs, but to solve each particular case of each particular state in the Arab world. I throw at the beginning this question, if whether the nation or the region are more important. I answered both are essential. Regional games are very important to define what happens inside each nation, but at the same time, each nation has very particular circumstances. There are countries which are much more stable than others. there are countries, Arab countries, where the situation is acceptable. I think we should highlight that as well. The same as we talk about Africa, this idea of everything being negative, pessimistic, dramatic, and drastic doesn't help, and it promotes this idea of Orientalism or Africanism. There is a book published in Spain. I don't know here. Africa is not a country due to all these general statements, and it's part of overcoming, to my mind, this state of victim to highlight the survival aspects. I will link this to the Palestinian cause tomorrow, but I insist, some our countries are stable, some our countries work well, some others don't. The situation in general is dramatic, okay? And I think that it is needed, what Edward Said also mentioned, to put in movement this, if I find the specific quotation, he insisted on the need of intellectuals and thinkers in the Arab world, and especially when talking about Palestine, to continue thinking, to creating new trends of thought, new avant-gardes as an essential part of liberation and emancipation. And that's why theory, the role of theory, is so important. I have brought this idea of Baathism today, despite its failure and despite its problems, because I consider it representative of the problematic itself, okay, but not as a pessimistic stance on the issues, but as a diagnosis of the complexity. Okay, and if you want to make a break, and later on we can hold the debate, we can continue talking.
Can maybe for an hour.
Okay, 30 minutes of break. Okay.
Va bene, lasciamo le domande per la fine. Diciamo adesso facciamo una pausa di una mezz'oretta, 20 minuti, 25, insomma, e poi riprendiamo. Vabbè.
Hello again. Well, I would like to continue some open issues and conversations, especially some debates we have had during the break, and some points I would like to clarify, as I have described them very quickly before, and now I have time to go deep into them. Just to finish with the issue of Iraq, that I will not analyze again, but I think that the issue of the academy should be highlighted, especially the situation of Iraq after the invasion and the post-invasion situation. In terms of approach of academics, how the entire system destructed all the intelligence system, the critical thinking field, precisely because this is part of how colonial powers work. It's not by chance, or it's not simply one more building that gets destroyed during war. Tomorrow we will apply this premise to the situation in Gaza, how the entire educational system is being destroyed on purpose to avoid new generations to think, to build a society, a country, a critical one. In the case of Iraq, that was very clear how the strong intelligence was a strategy and how the academia get completely eliminated. Another point I would like to insist on is that idea, because it may be controversial and I want to explain it profoundly, is the idea of how democracy wasn't introduced through democratic ways in the Middle East. I have explained that it was an attempt of Baathism to adapt these Western concepts, democracy, socialism, to a very particular idiosyncrasy that when not taking into account the specific traits of the people, of the land, of the society, it doesn't work. They tried it, but it is even worse to pretend to implement these ideas as they are or as they work in Europe, as if they are going to work in the same way in these Arab countries. And by this, I don't mean that they are not prepared or something like that. It's not an Orientalist view on their capacities or their lack of connection, natural incapability to develop or elaborate these ideas. On the contrary, I believe they can. But even in the case of Europe, these ideas don't grow in the void. They have, and this is what I wanted to explain because I just mentioned it, the Christian origin of many political concepts. One author that dedicated much time to explain this, and it's an author I don't like to focus on now or to link with the explanation of the Arab situation, because first he didn't talk about that, and because I don't want to establish spurious links, is Carl Schmitt. Okay, but I think we need to at least throw a glance to his theory. Carl Schmitt was a German author who had some links with Nazism, but who elaborated a theory that even today is used by some leftist trends and at the same time by some conservative positions. But I would say that today it's much more used by the left. Due to the analysis he makes with political concepts. And according to him, according to his thesis of political theology, which is an expression he takes from Bakunin, all modern concepts are religious and secularized concepts. That is, the term of representation, decision, division of power, actually belong to a Christian tradition that along centuries, and especially from the 17th century, along with the scientific revolution, the Peace of Westphalia, the secularization progress, become precisely secularized. Examples of this situation or of this transition of concepts. First, the idea of sovereign. According to Carl Schmitt, the idea of sovereign is the idea of divinity that secularized. In the Middle Ages, the idea was that divinity and God justified or invested with glory the political power. In modernity, due to secularization, that belief doesn't work anymore, but politics inherit that divine paper or that divine role. So the sovereign, even if in terms of content is not divine anymore, and that creates the entire theory of the Leviathan of Hobbes. The Leviathan is artificial, it's made by men. If we look at the front page, at the cover of the book, the Leviathan is a big man conformed by very, very small men. That the message is that is artificial, it's a construction. And once politics are conceived as a construction, it means that some transcendentality has been lost. But the exercise of power of this Leviathan, of this power is still divine. So the form instead of the content. again, Descartes is the form, how we know, more than what we know, because what we know are all objects, but how we know following the method, this can be applied to politics. The essence of the sovereign is not so important, but the exercise he does. That power of decision in context of exceptions that are the secularization of the exercises of miracles that divinity does. Again, this theory of political theology, I repeat that all modern concepts are religious and secularized terms. The division of powers into the three powers would represent also the structure of Christianism, and there are other concepts that that can follow this scheme. Other authors, for example, Hans Blumenberg, have criticized that these analogies work. Okay? According to him, Carl Schmitt forced the situation too much to support his own theory. So Blumenberg is critic, but even regardless of the fact that we agree or disagree, I mention this point because even if not so directly as a transformation of terms into others, we can't refuse or reject the idea that the Christian tradition in Europe has shaped the way politics have been done along these centuries. So if we agree with this idea, it seems coherent to admit that the way democracy can implement itself in Arab countries has to adapt or to make not a coincidence, but to reflect that that society to succeed. Otherwise, as I've just said, democracy will be introduced through non-democratic ways, and that will create inconsistencies. At the end, if the theory doesn't work, and if the theory is not integrated in the society, it will not work, right? At this regard, I want to mention, and we were commenting this in the break, that there were already some existing political structures in the Middle East against this Orientalist idea that native peoples are not able to organize each other or are not able to have a political system. They did have it, right? An example of that is a system that Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon carried out during many decades, which was a council of old people. Okay? That was the political structure they had in Palestine, and they have brought it to or they have reproduced it in the different refugee camps in Lebanon. This council of people was composed by 7 people to avoid a draw, and was a way to organize communities, to take decisions, to implement different social ways and social rules. However, with the imposition of some democratic structures, and this is not a critique to democracy, but to how it was implemented, this system disappeared, and then only one person with an apparatus or a political party or set of people following that unique person, that person was the one to take all the decisions. And then that created complex situations where that consensus of 7 people deciding or talking in the name of the community was broken, right? The idea was to be part of that Western democratic idea, but it hasn't worked. The same happens, for example, again in Lebanon with the quotas. To divide the power in a country so complex as Lebanon, with 18 confessions and 19 parties, right? The government establishes different quotas among these confessions, wants to occupy the position of prime minister or president, and that is a way which has been criticized, for example, by a very famous Lebanese author, Amin Malouf, in his book, Les Identités meurtrières. I don't know in English how it was translated. I don't know what you can for it, about identities in the Middle East, and the case of Lebanon, right? And how this quota system tried to represent and to solve the issue of this plurality, once again, the internal and external plurality, that has created a closed system to keep each community closed, and that has not promoted a real change or a full democratic development in a country that is struggling and is going through many crises, especially with the invasion and the bombardments on the part of Israel against the Lebanese population. And once that I have cleared this up, I think that it's a good moment to open the debate, or if you want to make some questions, I would be glad to answer. Online as well. Nope. There was a message and it was erased. I don't know which question. Maybe you want me to repeat something that wasn't clear. I can advance that tomorrow, so you can have the scheme for tomorrow. I will talk about the history of Palestine, the evolution in context, not to start simply on what has happened in the last year, but the entire situation since the end of the 19th century, to understand how we have arrived to the point where we are. So it will have a historical part. Then I will present a thesis I'm working on. I would like to count on your opinions, on your reflections, on your critics, because that will help me. Because my thesis, or what I'm working on right now, is on the role of the victims, the Palestinian victims, not only as victims but as survivors. That I mentioned the idea before, right? Not talking about Palestine, but in general. And a third step in this regard is not only how they become survivors, apart from victims, they are both, but they can acquire a third role, which is geopolitical paper. I know that it seems like too optimistic or too exaggerated, but that's not my intention. It's not simply like a desire expressed out loud. But I do really think that even without any particular intention of that, the Palestinian survivors are acquiring a geopolitical role in as much as they are contributing to conform new popular opinion or global opinion united against the occupation of Palestine and the situation in Gaza. And that creates new trends of action, of thinking, and how also through some aspects that usually are not included into politics, as culture, art, popular aspects, these can be tools of not only of survival, but also of politics. In order to do that, we need to widen the concept of politics itself. It's not only the institution or the politicians, but also some other activities which are beyond that, but which are, to my mind, political, have a political character, not only, but have also this component. And of course, I will go through the details of what is happening today in Palestine, in Gaza, and also in the West Bank, that sometimes is forgotten and is suffering the same violence by Israel as Gaza. And another point I will bring tomorrow will be related to something I went through today, which is the role of history, but not only as a contextual necessity, which it is, but also as a way to avoid, in Spanish we say, well, I don't, it's not my term, it was coined by Nurma Salha, memoricidio, memoricide, or something like that, which is to eliminate the memory of a people, their traditions, their bond and link and attachment to the land. And there are many strategies to avoid that memoricide. And that will be more or less the scheme I will follow tomorrow, in case you are interested. Any questions?
One question, because you are talking, this is better if you are there to speak, so. Okay. I have a little question because you are talking about the unity of the Arab people, but I think some of the people in the Arab countries are like auto-othering, fighting against the Arab world. For example, the Amazigh people in Morocco, the Lebanon, considering auto-considering like Phoenician, not Arabic, the Bedouin people in Jordan and Saudi Arabia, feeling different to the other Arabs in the world, and this kind of minorities or people fighting with the idea of unity. So if you can explain deeper this issue.
Thank you. The unity of Arab people, it's not only a very difficult practice, but theoretically, as you have mentioned, it's a very complex issue. I think that a democratic view on even on Pan-Arabism, that it's not working, because that's a problem, that Pan-Arabism didn't work due to external factors as colonialism, but also due to internal dynamics of difference. And we can't avoid admitting that they exist. Well, in the case of Bedouin people, in the places they are, I don't think they are a factor of lack of unity. Bedouins consider themselves as Arabs and are part of the societies they are integrated in, and they fully support Palestine, or in general, that feeling of being or considering themselves Arabs. It is true that as very specific groups, more linked with the land, far from urban areas. But in this case, I don't think, on the contrary, in some countries they contribute to give cohesion and unity to the country. It is impossible to have an homogeneous country from the point of view of the social class, the activity. There will be always this rural, urban dynamics also in Western countries. In the case of Amazigh in Morocco, or people in Lebanon who feel more identified as Phoenicians, I would say that that democratic idea we are thinking in, I guess, includes the respect for this minority. I don't know exactly in Lebanon what percentage we are talking about when talking about that this non-Arab feeling, right? But they should be integrated in these Arab countries, even if they are not or they don't consider themselves Arabs, because we are talking more about identification rather than real. I don't like talking about like ethnicities or blood, or it's more a feeling about how you identify yourselves. And there are Moroccans who identify themselves as Arab, others that identify themselves as Amazighs, and Lebanese who feel Arabs, and Lebanese who don't feel Arabs. I think that when the project is attractive in terms of content and in terms of quality, it is able to integrate. I mean, we have the example of Spain, which includes the different nations that have different languages. And I think we have achieved to build a country where different feelings can, what's the word? Can be intertwined with each other. The feeling of belonging to your town, to your city, to your region, to your country. Some people who identify themselves as Europeans. It is curious, for example, in Spain, that feeling towards Europe. It is very common to say, I'm going to Europe, or in Europe, as if we were not Europe. But still, people feel European. So identities are complex. And I think it should be possible to build an Arab unity, including these non-Arab people, precisely because it should be more a political project than project based on ethnicity or impure ethnicity. I've said that these projects based on socialism were not racist. It is true that talking about nation is risky because it's about the land, how you feel, or if you belong to the land or not, and that can be risky. And that's why it's important to build a strong theory. Nowadays, I insist, I think it's more the division than the unity, despite the strength that the support to Palestine exists, because I think it exists among all the groups, Arabs or non-Arabs, inside these regions. But I think that we should think all the time. I mean, now it seems impossible. It seems a chimera, a fiction. How is it going to be possible, the union of Arabs with all the problems that exist? But thank you. But it's mandatory. It's our obligation to continue thinking, proposing, to support the intellectuals, the academics, also people who don't belong to the academia but have ideas, because it's the only way to propose some plan, some project that probably, even if real, will fail, because all projects fail, starting with the French Revolution and with Arab Springs and popular movements in Europe. But this is the distance between, as established by Plato and through Kant, between the ideal and its materialization. It will be always imperfect, but as Plato said, ideals are not chimeras, but models of how things should be on Earth. Do you have any other questions? Online? if you want me to include any topic for tomorrow in relation to Palestine, I guess I can. I would be glad to incorporate it. Okay, then we can finish. Thank you very much. Thank you. See you tomorrow.